Time for an updated Series 4 and 5 tier list for Marvel Snap. The most expensive and exclusive grouping of Marvel Snap cards has ballooned up to 45 cards as of the recording of this video, but it is worth noting that there is relief in sight. Second Dinner has told us that we will get news on series drops returning before the end of the year, so stay tuned for that. Because there's so many cards in these series, I'm going to be giving the quickest rundown of why I've assigned each card to each power level and flexibility grouping today. Let's go ahead and get right to it, shall we? Kick things off with the flexible and powerful category. Alioth needs no introduction. It's contained in a variety of powerful decks, and if you want to be playing the best of the best, Alioth is a must-have Marvel Snap card right now. Our next flexible and powerful card is Nico Minaru, who's my personal favorite card in the game right now that goes into a variety of things. Her spellbook just provides you with so much utility, whether it's adding more stats to the board with her +2 or turning something into a demon spell, or it's getting you out of a tricky location situation by replacing it with a random. Nico almost always has something useful to be doing for you in any deck that she's included in. As Darkhawk approaches a full calendar year as a Series 4-5 card, it has been in the flexible and powerful grouping all except for one time as I've done these breakdowns over the last year. This card is just one of the most efficient stat sticks you can play for 4 resources, and the cards like Korg and Black Widow and Rockslide that make him even larger are quality disruptive pieces. Darkhawk's contained in various Zabu shells as well as Bounce and is quite good in a fantastic number of places. Perhaps the most flexible and powerful card in this category is the best 2-drop in the game, Jeff the Baby Landshark. Not only is it just reasonable stats, but its ability to get into lots of different locations not only gives you counterplay to key things in the metagame like Professor X, but it also mitigates location variance from things like Sanctum Sanctorum that would typically be out of reach for you. Iron Lad has found a home as just a generically good card that fleshes out a variety of strategies, whether it's giving you more consistent access to your combo pieces in a combo deck like Hela Tribunal, or it's simply letting you find your Darkhawk or your Darkhawk Disruption more consistently inside of Zabu shells. Iron Lad really sees play in a wide range of places. Our next flexible and powerful card, in my opinion, is one of the absolute best you can spend your resources on picking up in Marvel Snap, and that is Series 4 card Zabu. Zabu is a card that's simply not replaceable in any deck that's leveraging him, whether it's the consistently powerful Zabu Darkhawk deck or something more fun like Mr. Negative. There isn't another card that both lets you play your 4 energy cards on turn 3, while also enabling you the ability to play multiple 4 energy cards on the final turn of the game. Rounding out the flexible and powerful category this time around, we have Nebula, who's easily one of the best 1 energy stat sticks in the game. She is an easy staple inclusion in lockout decks playing things like Storm and Professor X, but she's also just a pretty generically good 1 energy card inside of other strategies due to how she manipulates the way in which your opponent feels compelled to play to the board. As we move into the narrow and powerful category, we have a number of cards that are contained in top meta decks consistently, but they tend to be limited to 1 or 2 decks as opposed to being found in a variety of them. To start off this grouping, I have Werewolf by Night, one of Marvel Snap's most efficient stat sticks in the game that not only makes a big number, but also jumps around the board in a way that can be difficult to predict, allowing it to duck commonly played tech cards like Shang-Chi and Shadow King. I have Werewolf by Night in the narrow category as opposed to the flexible category because Werewolf does need a very specific supporting cast to really get leveraged well. You need a lot of cheap on reveal effects that only decks like Bounce or Loki are really able to consistently play well. Speaking of Loki, he's the next card in our narrow and powerful category, consistently being a top deck in the format since he was added to the game, but he essentially only sees play inside of his deck, earning him the narrow classification. Up next, we have High Evolutionary, who's consistently found himself in 1 or 2 top-performing decks since he was added to the game. Most recently, the Infinite/She-Hulk High Evolutionary matchup featuring Leech has been the most consistent, but there's also a smattering of B and C tier High Evolutionary decks hiding around the fringes of the format as well. Our next two narrow but powerful cards go hand in hand with X-23 as well as Null. Since X-23 released earlier this year, the Destroy archetype has been a mainstay in Marvel Snap, consistently being one of the most popular as well as powerful decks that you can pick up and play. X-23 is instrumental to this deck's success, giving you extra energy on key turns to do things like play Null a turn sooner, or let you play a 6 energy card such as Null alongside your Deadpool on the 6th and final turn of the game. Closing out our narrow and powerful groupings, we have another dynamic duo here that are MODOK as well as Daken. MODOK, a card that has been a staple in discard decks since its addition to the game, and Daken, who reads like a discard as well as destroy deck, but has really only found a home inside of the discard deck in recent months. While the discard deck's not doing anything particularly flashy, it has consistently put up fantastic results since the blade change that happened a few months ago, giving that archetype some much needed additional consistency. Moving along to our flexible and fine category, we have a number of cards that you can smatter into a variety of different places, but they're not consistently found in any of the top performing decks in Marvel Snap's metagame in the most recent months. To kick things off, we have Marvel Snap's latest release in Annihilus. Annihilus, alongside Sentry as well as Hood, has popped up as another 3-card package that's been slotted into a variety of shells, ranging from Werewolf bounce decks to Lockout prison decks and Clutter, and a few other things on the in-between. Up next in our flexible category, we have the Spider-Ham, who is once again one of the premier cheap disruptive cards in Marvel Snap. With Mobius and Mobius being pushed out of the metagame for a variety of reasons, people are once again having to pay full price for the pork that you are giving them. Spider-Ham is a premier 1 energy card for jumping your Werewolf by Night around the board, but it's also a fantastically cheap card to just deploy on curve to disrupt whatever strategy your opponent is trying to execute. Our next card is one of the most impressive glow-ups in Marvel Snap history, and that is the Negasonic Teenage Warhead. Her 3/2 stat line that now lets her stay on the board after blowing up only your opponent's next played card in the lane has found her a home in control decks as well as Cerebro 2 alike. I think she's a pretty generically flexible card that can be quite potent in any deck that's looking to play for priority going into the final turns of the game. Speaking of glow-ups, we have Snowguard as another card in the flexible and fine category. She is a staple in powerful decks like Loki, while also finding a home in some off-meta decks like Silver Surfer, and even occasionally popping up in other Werewolf by Night decks, since she's a cheap card with an on-reveal effect that also generates you additional on-reveal effects for your wolf. Our next flexible and fine card is one that doesn't see quite as much play as it used to, and that is Legion. I do still think this card is quite potent, though, and can be a reasonable top end in a variety of decks, especially when your opponent is not expecting it. Legion into a variety of locations, such as Bar with No Name or Death's Domain, can be an instant win in spots where your opponent thought they had certain victory. Silk offers a premium stat line of 5 points of power for just 2 energy and sees play in decks looking to enable Kraven as well as Cerebro 5 and a handful of other off-meta things that see play consistently. Our last 2 cards in the flexible and fine category are ones that I generally refer to as replacement level cards, meaning while I think they are quite reasonable power level, I'd also recommend nobody spend resources on them because you can easily sub them out for something else and keep your deck operating at similar efficiency. The first of these is Gladiator, who's just an on-reveal 3 energy stat stick, easily subbed out for Polaris or Spider-Man in any deck list you find him in. The second is Mirage, who gives you a little bit of information about what's in the opponent's hand, but ultimately is just a 2 energy card that generates another card to fill your hand, meaning you could typically replace her with something like Maria Hill or Mantis, or even something like Sentinel, and be operating at a similar level of efficiency. As we move into the narrow and fine category, we have a number of cards that typically headline the decks that they're contained in, meaning they're not easily replaceable, but at the same time, the decks that they're headlining tend to be B or C rate decks that are not typically top metagame picks. Kick things off, we have Marvel Snap's Mad Titan in Thanos, who of the late largely only sees play inside of Lockout prison decks, which have largely been upstaged, unfortunately, by the more consistent variations not playing Thanos, featuring Marvel Snap's latest season pass card, Miss Marvel. Galactus is obviously necessary to play any Galactus decks, as it's the only card that blows away 2/3 the board. That being said, the most successful Galactus variations of the late are Professor X Alioth decks, and it's not clear from the data that those decks aren't just strictly worse than the non-Galactus variation of the prison archetypes that people can play. Living Tribunal had a brief moment in the sun during the Loki-dominated metagame, during which the Hela MODOK Tribunal combo deck was quite strong into Loki as the best deck in the format. That being said, as things shaped up post-Alioth release, that Invisible Woman-dependent combo deck became worse and worse, since a nasty purple fart could blow away one of your key pieces. That being said, there's still variations of Lockjaw Hela and other Living Tribunal combo decks that have been lurking around the edge of the format, still putting up all right results, and Living Tribunal is very much not replaceable if you want to play one of those decks. Similar to Living Tribunal, Phoenix Force enjoyed a brief moment in the sun thanks to having a strong Loki matchup and the fact that Loki decks pushed a lot of the potent tech cards like Shang-Chi and Shadow King out of the format. That being said, as the metagame has diversified again, those popular tech cards have crept their way in, and the things that the Phoenix Force is looking to set up are often very susceptible to your opponent interacting with you. The Black Knight has a similar problem to the Phoenix Force in that it's doing something that's pretty objectively powerful in a vacuum, often giving you a 4/14 or a 4/20 as a generated Black Blade card. That being said, it's super susceptible to disruption, and as long as Shang-Chi and especially Shadow King are omnipresent cards in the format, it feels like Black Knight's going to struggle to ever be a top tier card. Ravonna Renslayer is a card that I wouldn't be surprised if she's in a higher category the next time I record one of these videos. Her glow up to a 2/1 from a 3/3 feels like it strongly improved the card, and it's just going to take a little bit for people to figure out exactly how this cost reducer is going to fit into a powerful deck. That being said, there are some Darkhawk variations as well as more fun Mr. Negative decks that have been leveraging her to great effect, and she's definitely at the very least fine at this current snapshot in time. Elsa Bloodstone as well as Kitty Pryde are both cards that aren't quite what they used to be after over-the-air updates adjusted their text boxes. That being said, I think the Bounce Shell as well as the Movers deck leverages both of these cards to great effect still, and they definitely deserve at the very least a fine classification. Lady Deathstrike is this weird blend of a destroy enabler as well as tech card for removing opposing things like goblins or Luke Cages or others. She really hasn't found a home in the current Marvel Snap metagame, but I also wouldn't be surprised if things shifted to change that in the future. While none of the top performing destroy decks in the metagame leverage Nimrod, there are some Electra ramp variations as well as Galactus shells that still leverage this fun card, and it's very unique in the effect that it provides, so I think it's worthwhile if you're looking to blow things up in a fancy combo way. The Man-Thing has solidified itself as one of the many cards that can supplement the Zabu Darkhawk deck as a card that puts a lot of stats on the board. In the right metagame slash matchup, Man-Thing can be deploying as much as 13 points worth of power for just 4 energy, which is quite an impressive rate. While Hitmonkey is no longer a metagame powerhouse, it does still find itself having a home inside of various decks looking to play their hand out on the final turn of the game with cards like Mysterio, as well as ones that utilize Jane Foster to fish up a variety of zero-cost cards. Our next two cards are ones that I kind of thought would go hand in hand, but then ultimately they did not, and those are Silver Samurai as well as Stature. Silver Samurai has largely found home as an enabler inside of Hela decks that are looking to have a little bit more precision, discarding low power cards like Jubilee and White Tiger, thus never risking discarding their deck's namesake in Hela. Stature ultimately has found that it does not need the added consistency of another card that forces your opponent to discard cards, and she still sees regular play inside of Zabu shells and some decks featuring Werewolf by Night, but by and large she's only accompanied by Black Bolt in her typical shells. Stegron is one of my pet cards that always feels this close to being good enough. It currently sees play in Cerebro 5 as a fringe deck, but outside of that, it does not have a consistent home inside of the format. Up next, we have the Ghost Spider, who sees play as a key move enabler in more fringe movement decks looking to leverage things like Vulture and Human Torch. More recently, she also saw play inside of some Werewolf by Night shells looking to leverage things like Dr. Octopus and Gladiator, who Ghost Spider can reposition after they bite off more than they can chew. Our last three cards of the narrow and fine category are all tech cards I think are quite reasonable under the right circumstances slash metagame. The first of these is quite good right now, and that is Echo, phenomenal into Miss Marvel, who wants to be played in the center, as well as letting you prevent Professor X from locking down a lane. Mobius and Mobius is no longer needing to prevent Wave from locking you out of the game, and other cost reducing strategies like Loki saw nerfs in other ways, so he's really just not the metagame force that he once was when he released. Finally, Jean Grey is a card that can restrict your opponent's ability to play in the locations where they want to play out to, but she often comes up short in metagames like we often experience, where your opponent is playing out multiple cheap cards on the final few turns of the game. Finally, to close things out, we have 4 remaining cards in my kind of bad category. They are Howard the Duck, Kang the Conqueror, Master Mold, and Spider-Man 2099. Howard the Duck is a card that I'm not even sure I would want adjustments to. He does see play inside of some Spectrum slash Iron Lad decks, and he has a unique and novel effect. I think Howard is largely a casualty of the fact that his effect just isn't powerful enough for anyone to justify spending 6,000 collector's tokens on or ripping a spotlight cache for, so just most people don't have access to him, and I wouldn't recommend they gain access to him. Kang the Conqueror is a pretty miserable effect that, all things considered, just doesn't have a reasonable impact on the game, considering the amount of tedium and time wasting that he has. A big part of Kang's issue, in my opinion, is the fact that if you're a good Marvel Snap player, you know the cards that your opponent is going to have 75% of the time, so Kang's not really giving you information that you didn't already have if you were good at the game. Master Mold is just an incredible liability since Loki was added to the game. Filling your opponent's hand up so they can turn it into more cards to throw back at you is absolutely not something you want to be doing. Even before Loki existed, Ronin, the primary card that Master Mold enables, is just not easy to enable compared to something like Devil Dinosaur or Darkhawk, and I think Master Mold, Ronin, or both probably realistically need a rework before this card can be good. Finally, Spider-Man 2099 is probably the card in this kind of bad category that I personally have spent the most time playing with. He's a ton of fun and offers a really novel effect. That being said, he's just so much weaker than other tech cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress that come at the exact same energy cost that it's really hard to justify playing 2099, who requires a lot of specific setup. That was a lot of cards. I tried to keep it as brief as possible, also providing insight as to why I was classifying each card in each category. If you enjoyed my insights on this topic, be sure to snap that like button and leave a comment down below. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You watched all the way through to the end of the video, so you probably enjoyed at least some of what I had to say. I'd love to see you back again here sometime for some more Marvel Snap content on YouTube.